The first thing I saw was not a photo. It was not lipstick on a collar. It was not some guilty look across the dinner table. It was one message on my wife's laptop. "I hate leaving you in his bed." And the sender was my brother. For a few seconds, I just stared at the screen, waiting for my mind to give me another explanation. A joke. A misunderstanding. A mistake. But then, another message appeared. "Soon, Claire. I promise. He has no idea." That was the moment my marriage stopped being a marriage and became evidence. Evidence that my wife had been lying to my face. Evidence that my brother had been smiling beside me while stealing the life I thought I was building. But what destroyed me most was not even them. It was my parents. Because when I brought them the truth, when I sat at their kitchen table, with my whole life shattered in my hands, they did not ask how I was breathing. They did not ask what I needed. They asked me to keep quiet. Because if people found out, my brother's reputation would be ruined. That night, I realized I had spent my entire life being the son they expected to forgive, while my brother got to be the son they protected. So I stopped explaining. I stopped begging. I stopped trying to be chosen. I packed one bag, changed my number, left everything behind, and disappeared from their lives before they ever understood that this time, I was never coming back. My name is Daniel Carter, and for most of my life, I believed family was supposed to be the safest place in the world. I believed that no matter how badly life treated you, you could always go home. You could always sit at your parents' kitchen table, hear your mother ask if you had eaten, watch your father pretend he wasn't worried while quietly fixing whatever was broken, and feel like the world still had one corner where you belonged. I believed that blood meant loyalty. I believed that brothers were supposed to protect each other, and I believed my wife loved me. Looking back now, I almost feel sorry for the man I used to be. Not because he was weak, but because he was innocent in a way life eventually punishes. My older brother, Mark, destroyed my marriage. My parents took his side. So I disappeared. But before I tell you how I walked away from everyone who betrayed me, you need to understand how it all began. Mark was the golden son. Every family has one, even if they pretend they don't. In ours, it was obvious from the beginning. Mark was 2 years older than me, louder than me, better looking in that careless, confident way people seem to admire for reasons I never fully understood. When we were kids, if Mark broke something, it was an accident. If I broke something, I should have been more careful. If Mark got into trouble at school, he was spirited. If I got into trouble, I was disappointing. If Mark quit something, he was finding himself. If I quit something, I lacked discipline. My parents never said they loved him more. They didn't have to. Children notice the temperature of a room. They know which child gets warmth and which child gets rules. I learned early that love in my family had conditions. Mark learned early that consequences were for other people. Still, I loved him. That is the part that makes me angry now. I loved him. I looked up to him when I was young. I wanted him to be proud of me. I wanted us to be close. There were moments when he acted like a real brother. He taught me how to ride a bike after my dad lost patience. He once punched a kid who made fun of my stutter in middle school. He snuck me into a movie I wasn't old enough to see and bought me popcorn with the money he stole from our mother's change jar. Those memories kept me loyal for years longer than I should have been. Because whenever Mark did something cruel, I would remember the bike, the bully, the popcorn. I would tell myself he wasn't a bad person. He was just reckless. He was selfish, but he loved me deep down. I built excuses for him like a carpenter building a house. And then I married Claire. Claire was everything I thought I wanted. I met her at a friend's backyard barbecue when I was 28. She was standing near the patio, laughing at something someone said, holding a plastic cup of lemonade, wearing a yellow dress that caught the last light of the evening. I remember that detail because it felt like a scene from a movie. I remember thinking, before I even knew her name, that some people seem to carry sunlight with them. She was warm. Funny. Sharp. The kind of woman who could make a room feel more alive just by entering it. When she spoke to me, she made me feel chosen. That might sound simple, but for a man who spent his childhood trying to earn attention from people who always seemed to be looking past him, being chosen felt like oxygen. We started dating 2 weeks later. Within 6 months, I was certain I would marry her. Within a year, I proposed. My parents liked her immediately. My mother said Claire had class. My father said she was good for me, which from him was practically a poem. Mark liked her too. Too much, as it turned out. At first, I didn't see it. Or maybe I did see it and refused to understand it. Mark had always been charming. He flirted with waitresses, cashiers, neighbors, married women, single women, women who were clearly not interested. That was just Mark being Mark, everyone said. Claire laughed at his jokes. He teased her. She teased him back. He called her little sister after the wedding, and she rolled her eyes, smiling. I told myself it was harmless. The wedding was beautiful. I remember standing at the altar and watching Claire walk toward me. For once in my life, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Mark stood beside me as my best man. He clapped me on the shoulder and whispered, "Don't mess this up, little brother." At the time, I laughed. Now, that sentence feels like a warning from a man who already knew he could take whatever he wanted from me. The first year of marriage was happy. At least, I thought it was. Claire and I rented a small house on the edge of town. It had old floors that creaked in the winter and a kitchen window that looked out over a maple tree. I worked as a project manager for a construction company. Long hours but decent pay. Claire worked in marketing for a local firm. We weren't rich, but we were building something. Sunday mornings were ours. We would sleep late, make pancakes, drink coffee in old mugs, and talk about places we wanted to visit someday. We talked about children too. Claire wanted two. I wanted one at first, then maybe another. We joked about names. She liked Emma for a girl. I liked Grace. For a boy, she liked Ethan. I said Ethan sounded like a kid who would be better at sports than me. She laughed and kissed me. I thought I was happy. Then small things began to change. Claire started guarding her phone. Not dramatically. Not in a way that would make you suspicious if you weren't already trained by life to ignore warning signs. She simply turned the screen down more often. She took it with her when she left the room. She smiled at messages but said they were from work. She also started dressing up on days when she said she was just running errands. When I complimented her, she said, "Can't a woman look nice for herself?" Of course, she could. I felt guilty for even noticing. Then Mark started coming around more. He had recently ended another relationship, one of many. He said he was lonely. He said he missed hanging out with us. He would stop by with beer, invite himself to dinner, stay too late. Claire never seemed bothered. In fact, she seemed brighter when he was around. I remember one Friday night clearly. We were in the kitchen. Claire was cooking pasta. Mark was leaning against the counter, telling a story about some woman he met at a bar. Claire laughed so hard she had to put down the spoon. I stood there holding plates, watching them, and felt like an extra in my own home. When Mark left, I told Claire, gently, that I thought he was around too much. She looked at me like I had disappointed her. "He's your brother, Daniel," she said. "He's lonely. I know, but sometimes I just want it to be us." "It is us," she said. "You're being insecure." That word shut me up. Insecure. Nobody wants to be that husband. The jealous one. The controlling one. The man who sees shadows where there are none. So, I apologized. That became a pattern. I noticed something. Claire called me insecure. I apologized. I questioned something. Claire said I didn't trust her. I apologized. I felt hurt. Claire said I was making her responsible for my childhood issues. I apologized. And Mark kept coming around. Then came the company retreat. Claire's firm organized a weekend retreat at a lakeside resort about 2 hours away. Spouses weren't invited. She left Friday afternoon with a suitcase and kissed me quickly at the door. I spent that weekend working on repairs around the house. I fixed the loose railing on the porch. I cleaned the garage. I painted the guest room, because Claire had been saying she wanted it done before we started trying for a baby. On Saturday night, I texted her. "How's the retreat?" She replied 2 hours later. "Good. Exhausted. Going to bed soon. Love you." I smiled at the message. Then, 20 minutes later, Mark posted a photo on social media. It was blurry, taken in a bar or restaurant. He was with a group of people. At first, nothing seemed strange. Then, I saw the background. A wooden sign near the wall. The name of the lakeside resort. I stared at the photo for a long time. Mark had not mentioned going out of town. I zoomed in until the picture became pixelated. My heart started beating in a slow, heavy way. Claire wasn't in the photo. But there was a woman's hand resting on Mark's shoulder from just outside the frame. A hand with a small silver bracelet. Claire had that bracelet. I bought it for her on our first anniversary. I told myself it could be anyone. I told myself I was being paranoid. Then Mark deleted the photo. I didn't sleep that night. When Claire came home Sunday afternoon, she looked tired but happy. She smelled faintly of perfume and lake air. I asked, "Was Mark at the resort?" She froze for less than a second. Most people would have missed it. I didn't. "What?" she said. Mark posted a picture. "From the resort." "Oh," she said, looking away. "Yeah. Apparently he was nearby with some friends. We ran into him for like 5 minutes." "You didn't mention that." "Because it wasn't important." "Why did he delete the picture?" "I don't know, Daniel. Ask him." She walked past me into the bedroom. I stood in the hallway, feeling something inside me begin to crack. I did ask Mark. He laughed. "Man, you're losing it," he said. "I was there with friends. Claire was there for work. We said hello. That's it. Why delete the photo?" "Because I looked drunk." "You always look drunk." He laughed again. "See? You're fine. Stop acting weird." When I told my mother about it, she sighed. "Daniel, honey, you've always been sensitive about Mark." Sensitive. That was another word people used when they didn't want to admit they had hurt you. My father said, don't create problems in your marriage because of jealousy. No one asked why I was worried. No one considered that maybe, just maybe, I had a reason. 2 months later, I found out the truth by accident. Claire had left her laptop open on the kitchen table. She was in the shower. I wasn't looking for anything. I had gone to move it because I needed space to set down groceries. A message notification appeared in the corner of the screen. From Mark. I hate leaving you in his bed. For a moment, my body didn't understand what my eyes had seen. The words sat there, impossible and undeniable. Then another message appeared. Soon, Claire. I promise. He has no idea. I remember the sound of the shower running. I remember the refrigerator humming. I remember my hand gripping the edge of the table so hard my knuckles went white. I clicked the message. Maybe I shouldn't have. Maybe that was the moment my life ended. Or maybe it had ended long before, and I was only discovering the body. There were months of messages. Months. Not one mistake. Not one drunken kiss. Not one terrible night they regretted. Months of planning, laughing, mocking me. Claire had sent Mark photos from our bedroom. She complained about me. She told him I was boring, predictable, too nice, too nice. Mark told her she deserved a real man, my brother, my wife, in my house, in my bed. I don't remember sitting down, but suddenly I was on the kitchen chair. My ears were ringing, the messages blurred. Then I saw one that turned my pain into something colder. Claire had written, "What about your parents? They'll hate me." Mark replied, "No, they won't. Mom already thinks Daniel is too insecure. Dad will back me. They always do." Claire replied with a laughing emoji. I sat there until the shower turned off. When Claire came into the kitchen, wrapped in a towel, she stopped immediately. She saw her laptop. She saw my face. For once, she had no speech prepared. "How long?" I asked. She didn't answer. "How long, Claire?" She clutched the towel tighter around herself. "Daniel? How long?" She started crying. I used to think tears meant truth. They don't. Sometimes tears are just another strategy. "It just happened," she said. I turned the laptop toward her. Her face changed. Not guilt. Not exactly. Fear. Not fear of losing me. Fear of being exposed. I stood up. She reached for me. "Please, let me explain. Don't touch me." She flinched as if I had slapped her. I almost laughed at the cruelty of that. She had betrayed me in every way a person could, but my refusal to be touched made her the victim. I called Mark. He didn't answer. I called again. Nothing. So I texted him. "I know." He replied 10 minutes later. "Come on, man. Let's talk." That was it. Not "I'm sorry." Not "I was wrong." Let's talk. As if this were a business misunderstanding. I packed a bag that night. Claire followed me from room to room, crying, apologizing, then blaming, then apologizing again. She said she never meant to hurt me. I asked how someone accidentally sleeps with her husband's brother for months. She said she was lonely. I asked when I had abandoned her. She said emotionally. I asked what that meant. She said I wouldn't understand. I left before I did something I would regret, like beg. I drove to my parents' house. That was my last mistake. My mother opened the door in her robe, startled. My father appeared behind her. When they saw my face, they knew something was wrong. I told them everything. Not dramatically. Not screaming. I sat at their kitchen table and told them that Mark and Claire had been having an affair for months. I told them I saw the messages. I told them Claire admitted enough by not denying it. My mother covered her mouth. My father looked angry. For one brief, foolish second, I thought the anger was for me. Then Mark arrived. Claire must have called him. Or maybe my parents did. I don't know. He walked into the kitchen wearing jeans and a gray hoodie, hair messy like he had been asleep. He looked at me with a face I will never forget. Annoyance. Not shame. Annoyance that I had made this inconvenient. "Daniel," he said. "You need to calm down." I stood so quickly the chair scraped the floor. "You don't get to say my name." My mother stepped between us. "Both of you, stop." I stared at her. "Both of us?" Mark sighed. "It wasn't planned. You sent her messages from my bedroom." He looked away. My father said, "Sit down. We're going to handle this like adults." "Like adults?" I repeated. He pointed at the chair. "Sit." I didn't sit. That seemed to offend him more than the affair. Claire arrived 15 minutes later, eyes red, hair damp, wearing the same clothes from earlier. She went straight to my mother, who hugged her. I watched my mother comfort my wife after she cheated on me with my brother. Something inside me went very still. Claire sobbed into my mother's shoulder. I'm so sorry. My mother stroked her hair and said, "We'll figure it out. We. Not Daniel. Not my son. We." My father looked at me and said, "This is a terrible situation. But destroying the family won't fix it." I laughed once. It sounded ugly. "I'm destroying the family?" He frowned. "You know what I mean." "No. I really don't." Mark finally spoke. "I love her." The room went silent. Claire lifted her head. My mother closed her eyes. My father rubbed his forehead. I stared at my brother. You what? Mark swallowed. I love her. And she loves me. Claire whispered. Mark. He looked at me. I'm sorry it happened this way. But you and Claire weren't happy. I waited for my parents to react. For my father to stand up. For my mother to slap him. For someone to say, how dare you? No one did. My mother just began crying harder. My father said, Mark, this is not helping. Not, you betrayed your brother. Not, you should be ashamed. Just, this is not helping. I looked at Claire. Do you love him? She didn't answer. That was the answer. I nodded slowly. Then my mother said the sentence that finished me. Daniel, maybe you and Claire can separate quietly for a while. We don't need everyone knowing the details. I turned to her. What? She wiped her face. I'm not saying what they did was right. Of course it wasn't. But if this gets out, it will ruin Mark's reputation. Claire's too. People will talk. I felt like I had fallen through the floor into another world. My wife slept with my brother, and you're worried people will talk? My father said, your mother is trying to be practical. Practical? He leaned forward, using the voice he used when he thought the conversation was over. You need to think carefully. Divorce is serious. Accusations are serious. You don't want to make decisions from anger. Anger? I said. You think this is anger? What do you want us to do? He snapped. Disown him? Throw Claire into the street? Make a public spectacle? I want you to act like I'm your son. The words came out before I could stop them. For the first time that night, everyone went quiet. My mother looked wounded. My father looked offended. Mark looked away. Claire cried softer. I grabbed my keys. My mother said, Daniel, don't leave like this. I looked at her and said, you already chose. Then I walked out. I stayed in a motel that night. A cheap one near the highway with thin walls and a flickering bathroom light. I sat on the edge of the bed until sunrise. Still wearing my shoes. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Claire called 37 times. Mark texted twice. Please don't make this ugly. Then, you're still my brother. My mother sent long messages about forgiveness, family, and how pain makes people do things they regret. My father sent one message. Come home tomorrow. We need to discuss this calmly. Discuss. As if my marriage were a contract dispute. By morning, I knew two things. 1. I was getting a divorce. 2. I was done begging people to love me correctly. I took screenshots of every message from Claire's laptop before leaving the house that night. I emailed them to myself. I stored copies in 3 places. Then I called a lawyer. Her name was Rachel Kim. She was calm, precise, and terrifying in a way I deeply appreciated. After I told her what happened, she said, do not confront them again. Do not threaten them. Do not post anything online. From now on, communicate in writing when possible. I followed every instruction. Claire wanted to meet in person. I refused. Mark wanted to clear the air. I refused. My parents wanted a family meeting. I refused. Refusal became my first act of self-respect. For the next few weeks, everyone tried different tactics. Claire began with apology. I made a terrible mistake. Then romance. I still love you. Then blame. You were emotionally unavailable. Then panic. You're going to ruin my life. Mark tried guilt. Don't let this destroy us. Then arrogance. You can't keep running. Then anger. You're acting like a child. My mother tried tears. I can't sleep knowing my boys hate each other. My father tried commands. You will come to dinner Sunday. I didn't respond. When the divorce papers were served, Claire lost control. She showed up at my workplace. The receptionist called me and said my wife was in the lobby crying. I told her to ask Claire to leave. Claire refused. My boss, who knew nothing, came to my office looking concerned. I had no choice. I walked into the lobby. Claire stood there with red eyes, clutching her purse like she was the abandoned one. Daniel, she said, voice trembling. Please, just talk to me. Everyone was watching. That was why she came. She wanted an audience. She wanted witnesses to see her pain, not her betrayal. I kept my voice low. Leave. I'm your wife. Not for long. She flinched. How can you be so cold? I almost answered honestly. Because warmth was wasted on you. Instead, I said, if you don't leave, security will escort you out. Her face changed. For a second, I saw the real Claire under the tears. Angry, humiliated. You'll regret this, she whispered. No, I said. I regret marrying you. She left. That night, my mother called me screaming. Not crying, screaming. How could you humiliate Claire like that? I stood in my rented apartment, holding the phone, almost impressed. She came to my job. She was desperate. She cheated on me with Mark. People make mistakes, Daniel. I closed my eyes. A mistake is forgetting milk. A mistake is missing an exit. Sleeping with my brother for months is a choice. My mother went quiet. Then she said, you have always been hard to comfort. That sentence hurt more than I expected. Not because it was true, because I realized she had never really tried. I hung up. The divorce took 7 months. 7 months of documents, negotiations, lies, half-truths, and family pressure. Claire wanted spousal support, even though she worked and we had no children. She wanted half the savings, including money I had put aside before marriage. She wanted the house lease transferred to her, even though I had already moved out. She wanted sympathy most of all. And she got it from my family. Mark moved in with her 3 months after I left. They tried to keep it quiet, but small towns are not built for secrets. Someone saw his truck parked outside overnight. Someone else saw them grocery shopping together. Eventually they stopped pretending. My parents invited them both to Thanksgiving. I found out from my cousin Emily, who called me 2 days before. "Are you going?" she asked carefully. "Going where?" She went silent. That was how I learned my parents were hosting Thanksgiving with my cheating wife and my brother as a couple. I laughed because the alternative was something worse. Emily said, "I'm sorry, Daniel, I thought you knew." "No," I said. "But thank you for telling me." That night my mother texted, "Thanksgiving will be difficult this year, but we hope you can come and be civil. Be civil." I stared at those words for a long time. Then I replied with the first message I had sent her in weeks. "I won't be attending. Do not contact me again unless someone has died." She replied almost immediately, "That is a cruel thing to say to your mother." I didn't answer. Thanksgiving came and went. Christmas came. My parents sent an invitation. I ignored it. On Christmas Eve, my father showed up at my apartment. I opened the door, because I thought it was food delivery. He looked older than I remembered, but still stern, still convinced the world should arrange itself around his expectations. "We need to talk," he said. "No." He put his hand against the door when I tried to close it. I looked down at his hand. "Move it." His jaw tightened. "I didn't raise you to treat family like this." Something in me snapped, but quietly. "No," I said. "You raised me to accept being treated like this." He blinked. I continued. "You raised Mark to take whatever he wanted. You raised me to forgive him for taking it. That ends now." His face reddened. "Your brother made a mistake. My brother destroyed my marriage." Claire was unhappy. I stared at him. There it was. The excuse they had all chosen. Claire was unhappy. So betrayal became understandable. Mark loved her. So betrayal became complicated. I was hurt, so I became unreasonable. "Get out," I said. He looked shocked. "Daniel," I said, "get out." He left with a final warning. "One day you'll need this family." I closed the door and whispered to the empty apartment. "Not this one." The divorce finalized in March. I didn't celebrate. I sat in my car outside the courthouse after signing the last papers and felt nothing. No relief, no victory, just emptiness. Claire cried in the hallway. Mark waited outside by his truck. My parents were there too, because apparently betrayers need emotional support. My mother looked at me as I passed. "Daniel," she said. I kept walking. She grabbed my sleeve. I stopped and looked at her hand until she let go. "Please," she whispered. "Don't leave things like this." I looked at Mark standing beside Claire. Then at my father. Then back at my mother. "You left things like this." I walked away. That evening, I made the decision that changed my life. I quit my job. Not impulsively. I had been planning it for weeks. My company had a branch in Oregon. A position had opened there. Better pay, bigger projects, relocation assistance. My boss knew part of what happened and quietly supported the transfer. I accepted. I changed my phone number. I closed my social media accounts. I rented a small apartment in a city where nobody knew my family name. And then I disappeared. Not dramatically. No farewell letter. No final speech. No revenge post. No public exposure. I simply removed myself from every place they expected to find me. For people like them, that was worse than anger. Anger gives them something to fight. Silence gives them a mirror. The first year away was hard. I won't pretend it was some instant transformation. I did not arrive in Oregon, breathe mountain air, and become healed. Healing is ugly. It is waking up at 3 a.m. because you dreamed your wife was in your kitchen. It is standing in a grocery store and suddenly realizing you no longer know what you like to eat because your life had been built around someone else's preferences. It is seeing brothers laughing together in public and feeling a pain so sharp you have to leave. It is learning that peace feels boring when chaos raised you. I went to therapy because I was tired of being haunted. My therapist, Dr. Elaine Porter, was a woman in her 60s with silver hair and a voice that could cut through excuses like a knife through paper. During our third session, she asked me, "What do you miss most?" I said, "My family." She asked, "Do you miss them? Or do you miss who you needed them to be?" I hated that question. So I knew it mattered. Week by week, I began to understand things I had spent my life avoiding. My parents had not suddenly betrayed me. They had always been teaching me my place. Mark had not suddenly crossed a line. He had never believed lines applied to him. Claire had not destroyed me because I loved her. She destroyed me because I loved her more than I loved myself. That realization did not make me proud, it made me free. Slowly, I built a new life. I worked hard. The Oregon branch handled larger commercial projects, and I threw myself into the job. Not to escape, exactly, but to remember I was capable of building something that didn't collapse the moment someone lied. I made friends carefully. There was Miguel, a site supervisor who invited me to poker nights until I finally said yes. There was Hannah, an architect who argued with me about everything and somehow became one of my closest friends. There was James, my neighbor, a retired firefighter who adopted me without asking permission and brought soup whenever he made too much. I started hiking on weekends. At first, I hated it. Too quiet, too much time with my thoughts. Then I began to need it. There is something honest about mountains. They don't flatter you. They don't betray you. They simply stand there and force you to keep moving if you want to see the view. 2 years passed, then 3. I bought a small house. Nothing fancy. 2 bedrooms, a backyard, a porch that faced west. The first night I slept there, I woke up before dawn and walked through every room barefoot, touching the walls like I needed proof. Mine, not ours, mine. I painted the kitchen blue. Claire had hated blue kitchens. I got a dog from a shelter, a scruffy mutt named Winston who looked like he had survived a war and judged everyone for it. I learned to cook food I liked. I learned to be alone without feeling abandoned. And then, in the 4th year, my past found me. It started with an email from my cousin Emily. Subject: I'm sorry to bother you. I almost deleted it. Emily had been one of the only relatives who never pressured me. She sent a message once a year, usually around my birthday, saying she hoped I was well and didn't expect a reply. This email was longer. She wrote that my father had been diagnosed with a heart condition, not immediately fatal, but serious. Surgery was likely. My mother was not handling it well. Then came the line I expected. They've been asking about you. I sat at my kitchen table, Winston's head resting on my foot, and felt the old pull, guilt, obligation. That deep programming that says good sons return when parents suffer, even if those parents abandoned them when they suffered. I replied to Emily. Thank you for telling me. I'm sorry to hear about Dad. I hope surgery goes well. That was all. 2 days later, I received a letter. A physical letter. My mother's handwriting on the envelope. I don't know how she got my address. Maybe through Emily. Maybe through some online search. Maybe through a relative who thought reconciliation was noble when they didn't have to pay the cost. I left the letter on the counter for 3 days. Then I opened it. My dear Daniel, I know you may not want to hear from me, but your father is sick, and life is too short for this pain. Whatever happened, we are still your parents. Mark misses you. Claire asks about you too. We all made mistakes. Please come home before it is too late. Love, Mom. Whatever happened, we all made mistakes. Claire asks about you too. I read it twice, then I burned it in the sink. Not because I was dramatic, because I needed to watch it become ash. A week later, Mark called me. I don't know how he got my number. I had changed it years before. Hearing his voice after so long felt like opening a coffin and finding it empty. Daniel, he said. I said nothing. It's Mark. I know. He exhaled. Look, I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from. Correct. Dad's sick. I heard. He wants to see you. I looked out the window at my backyard. Winston chased a squirrel along the fence, full of purpose. What do you want, Mark? He was quiet. Then he said, Mom's falling apart. She thinks you hate her. She chose you. She can enjoy the results. That's not fair. I laughed softly. There was a time when I would have screamed. Now his words felt almost boring. Fair? I said. You slept with my wife. You moved in with her. Our parents invited you both to holidays and told me to be civil. Don't call me about fair. He swallowed. Claire and I aren't together anymore. I closed my eyes. Of course. Of course they weren't. People who build love from betrayal often discover the foundation is rotten. When? I asked. Not because I cared, but because some old wounded part of me wanted the details. 2 years ago. Congratulations. She cheated on me. I opened my eyes. For a second, the universe became very quiet. Then I laughed. Not loudly. Not happily. Just once. Mark said, I deserved that. You deserved worse. I know. No. I said. You don't. If you knew, you wouldn't have called. His voice cracked. I lost everything, Daniel. That sentence should have given me satisfaction. It didn't. It gave me clarity. Because when Mark said he lost everything, he meant Claire. He meant reputation. He meant comfort. He meant our parents' easy admiration after the truth became too ugly to ignore. He did not mean he lost me, because in his mind, I had always been something he could retrieve when needed. You didn't lose everything, I said. You threw people away and acted surprised when they didn't come back. He was crying now. I could hear it. I'm sorry. There it was. Years late. Worth almost nothing. I waited for my heart to soften. It didn't. I believe you're sorry now, I said. But I don't believe you were sorry when it mattered. Can we meet? No. Daniel, please. No. What about Dad? I took a breath. Tell Dad I hope his surgery goes well. He needs his son. He had 2 sons. He chose one. Then I hung up. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because I regretted hanging up. Because grief is complicated. You can be right, and still hurt. You can protect yourself and still mourn the relationship you wish existed. A month later, Emily called. Dad's surgery had complications. He survived, but recovery would be long. She said my mother was asking everyone to convince me to come home. Then she hesitated. There's something else. I waited. Your mom is telling people you abandoned the family because you couldn't forgive Claire. I almost smiled. Of course she was. In her version, I was the unforgiving son. The bitter ex-husband. The man who disappeared because he lacked grace. The actual story made her look too bad, so she edited it. I thanked Emily and ended the call. Then I did something I had avoided for 4 years. I wrote the truth. Not online. Not publicly. I wrote a letter to my parents. It took me 3 days. I wrote about Mark. About Claire. About the messages. About the night at their kitchen table. About my mother hugging Claire. About my father telling me not to make a spectacle. About Thanksgiving. About Christmas. About the years of silence. I wrote without insults. That was important. Insults would have given them something to dismiss. The truth needed no decoration. At the end, I wrote, "You are telling people I abandoned this family because I could not forgive. That is not true. I left because you taught me that protecting Mark mattered more than loving me. I left because my pain was treated as an inconvenience. I left because every time I asked to be seen, you asked me to be quiet. I do not hate you. Hate requires a closeness I no longer feel. I hope Dad recovers. I hope you both find peace. But I will not return to a family that only wants me back in the role of the forgiving victim. Do not contact me again unless you are prepared to tell the truth." I mailed copies to my parents, Mark, and Emily. Emily called crying, not because of what I wrote, but because she finally understood. "I'm sorry," she said. "I knew it was bad. I didn't know it was like that. Most people don't. Families are excellent at hiding their crimes under words like complicated, private, and painful." My parents did not call. For 6 weeks, silence. Then my mother sent one message. "I never meant to hurt you." I stared at it. That sentence has always bothered me. People say it as if intention erases impact. As if the absence of a plan makes the wound less real. I replied, "But you did." She didn't answer. Months passed. Then, unexpectedly, my father called. I almost didn't pick up. But I did. His voice sounded weaker. "Daniel. Dad." He breathed heavily for a moment. "I read your letter." I waited. He said, "I was angry at first." Of course he was. Then I read it again. I sat down. He continued, "I don't know how to fix what we did." My throat tightened despite myself. For years, I had imagined apologies. I had imagined them crying, begging, admitting everything. But reality was quieter. "I'm not asking you to fix it," I said. "I know." Another pause. Then he said, "I failed you." I closed my eyes. There are words you wait your whole life to hear. And when they finally come, they don't heal you instantly. They just prove you weren't crazy. I didn't cry. Not then. I said, "Yes, you did." He made a sound like the air had left him. "I thought keeping the family together was the right thing." "No," I said. "You thought keeping the truth quiet was the same as keeping the family together." He didn't argue. That was new. "I'm sorry," he said. This time, the words landed differently. Not enough to erase anything. But enough to be real. I appreciate